Welcome to another episode of Ex-Vicarious. I'm Braith, and today I'm joined by Will Eisenhuth. Will is an awesome copywriter and has recently launched his own LinkedIn ghostwriting agency for founders and executives. We both started posting on LinkedIn at a similar time and met through that journey. But the most interesting thing to me was how Will's path involved working at a top law firm, starting a podcast, growing a sporting YouTube channel, and doing social media at Fox Sports, all before becoming a copywriter. Yo, by the way, if you're new here, let me quickly tell you why I even do this podcast. In one sentence, it's because I believe life is wasted if you're not doing everything you can to make your wildest dreams come true. This often means going against the crowd, taking unconventional career paths, and building the mindset that makes you a millionaire, Olympian, red carpet actor, or even the queen of a food empire. Those are the exact people I interview so that you can learn from them and turn your own wildest dreams into reality. If you're a regular listener of Ex-Vicarious, it'll help me a ton if you like, subscribe, or share this round. So thanks for being here. Let's get back to this week's guest. So let's jump right in. Well, mate, how you going today?
I'm going great. Thanks, Braith. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to the chat.
Yeah, so I know you're overseas at the moment, and just wanted to ask, how's that experience been working remotely, especially since I know you launched your own agency as well recently?
Yeah, it's been fantastic. I'm in Da Nang, Vietnam, which is a beach town in the central area of Vietnam. The weather's a lot better than back home in Sydney at the moment. It's been very warm, and I've always wanted to do the working remotely thing, the digital nomad thing, I guess you'd say. I'd wanted to try it out, and been here for a few weeks so far, and a few more weeks to go, and it's been awesome. Even though you're doing more relaxing activities and having a little bit more fun than you would ordinarily, I find that I'm actually more productive because there's less distractions. Work's work and play's play. There's some good separation there, and it's just nice to change up your environment creatively as well. So I would highly recommend to anyone who has the opportunity to just go for it. It's unusual and stressful to start, but once you're here, it's amazing.
Yeah, I know you mentioned the creative part. So, like, just by being in a different environment and knowing that you could step out there and be on the beach right away, what sort of, I guess, ideas may have come to you just by being in a different environment? What sort of things have you thought about? Okay, maybe you want to implement it now into your workflow or even when you get back home?
Yeah, I find it's a lot of the more abstract elements of the business come to you quite naturally. So it mightn't be so much that I'm going to implement this system or this tool. It seems to me more around things like brand or the more esoteric elements of the business where you just have ideas like, what if I tried this? What if I took this approach to content? And I think it's also, you start thinking a little bit more long term as well. When you walk down to the beach and you're drinking a coconut or whatever it might be, you're not really thinking about, oh, I've got to get this task done. I've got to get that task done. Initially you are, but once you just give in to that initial resistance, you really start to have ideas about where do I want to take this business? What do I want to get out of this business in terms of lifestyle, in terms of business? What sort of things do I want to be working on long term? So I think it just opens up that abstract mind and that sort of creative long term thinking.
Yeah, like makes me think of the 80-20 rule as well, a little bit. Like you really figure out what's important for that long-term success. So yeah, that's really cool to hear. I wanted to just delve into your background a little bit. I know I mentioned it a little bit before about all those different work experiences you've had, ranging from working at Fox Sports and working at a top law firm. So I wanted to
Mm.
just ask, what was the reason between all those pivots, especially because all those industries seem to be quite different from each other? And yeah, just what was your sort of mindset or what was your ambition at each stage?
Absolutely. Yeah. So from the time that I started to seriously think about my career, so maybe around the age of 15, 16, heading into the later years of high school, I was pretty set on wanting to be a lawyer. I was watching Suits at the time, and even though I knew Suits was like a Hollywood style of lawyering, I still bought into it a little bit. I liked the idea of the expensive suits and the whiskeys in the corner office, and that wasn't all that interested me. I genuinely enjoyed the subject material that I was doing in legal studies at school. I've always loved to talk and debate and write. And so going to a career in law just seemed like a natural progression. And it was a tough thing to get into. And so I started working really hard. And I think it was just a lot of confirmations along the way as I started to get closer and closer to getting into university to study law. It was all these confirmations along the way. They're like, yeah, you're doing great. This is exactly what you want. And then you're right. I landed a job. It was just a sort of admin clerical job, one of the larger law firms in Australia. And it was an awesome experience early on. I was like, this is everything I've wanted. I'm in my second year of university. I've got a job at a great law firm. I can see myself working here long into the future. This is everything that I wanted. And it wasn't until I got into that situation that I started to question whether or not I actually wanted it. For me, as soon as you get thrown into the deep end, that's when you start to realize that it isn't suits, that it is long hours, that it is hard work, and it's very tedious work. Um, and I got into law thinking it would be all about writing and the speaking and creativity and flamboyance, but it was anything but that. For me, at least, that was what I could see. And I basically just had this complete realization that I don't want to do this. It's all I'd spent thinking about for the previous 5 years, both at school and at uni, and then getting the job. And a few months in, I was like, no, this isn't for me. And so it was a big question. Oh, what now? What if I don't want to do this? Should I just keep going because I've come down so far, or should I find something new? And it was hard for a while there to even make the decision to jump. I think I knew deep down before I told anyone that I was actually going to change. That was what I wanted. And then I thought, if I don't know what I want to do, why not explore it and explore different avenues? So I started a podcast and started interviewing people from all walks of life. Basically, just high achievers was the general gist of it. So I was interviewing athletes, media personalities, sports personalities. And I had Ben Damon, who's a boxing commentator, on, and I had him less for the boxing commentating, but more for some of the documentaries he'd made around sport. He did a documentary with Mike Tyson, for example, and I was really interested to hear about that. And I got really excited by this idea of working in sports, watching sport for a living and reporting on sport. And I had the writing skills and the speaking skills from law. I thought, why not try sports journalism? And I was very fortunate to receive a job at Fox Sports in a social media role. And I started there. And again, it was really exciting at the start. I was like, this is awesome. I get to watch sport all day. I get to report on it. Super exciting. And then again, after a few months, I thought, this isn't quite what I want to do. It was almost the opposite of law in that I didn't want to do law. It actually was quite similar in the sense that it wasn't all it was made out to be. It wasn't just watching sports. It was a lot of hard work and the glamour of it. I fell to the glamour again. And then moving into copywriting, it was basically a matter of, let's break it down to first principles. What do I like doing? I like writing. I like working. I always had this aspiration to build my business and to build my own thing and to do my own thing. And I felt that copywriting was a great area where I could do that. And I could work with a bunch of different industries and not have to pick one industry that I'm interested in, although copywriting is an industry. And started there, loved it, loved the day-to-day, actually started to love the grind, and then worked in a great copywriting agency called Meloti Media in Sydney. And then just a few months ago, started my own LinkedIn ghostwriting business. So it was a very topsy-turvy journey and probably a long explanation, but that was my thought processes at most of the stages.
Yeah, a lot of areas I want to delve into a bit further, but I know that you mentioned you always had that aspiration to build your own thing. So I wanted to just jump back, to the very beginning.
Mhm.
Would you say that was one of the first dreams you had that have been able to stay to this day? Or have you had other dreams that from an early age have stayed consistent with you to this day?
Yeah, the building the business thing, not so much. I always thought building a business was something that you did when you've worked 30 years in an industry, you're the industry leader, and then you step out and you create I just thought it happened. You transition into business in the same way that you might be a lawyer for 30 years and then step into politics. So I thought a business might be something that I did, but um, I was really drawn to, when I was lost for what I wanted to do, I was really drawn to the idea of having autonomy of your day, and not in a lazy sense, but just working hard on the things that I want to work on. So it wasn't always a dream. It was something that I came to realize probably once I saw what working a 9 to 5 or working the traditional route was like. But one of the dreams that I've always had, I think from a young age, was to write a book. And that is still a dream of mine that's probably continued to this day.
Yeah, so I know you mentioned that love for writing, as you said, wanted to write a book. How did the writing tasks that you may have had to do while you're in a law role or social media role, how did that compare to the day to day of the copywriting at Melotti Media? Because I know you mentioned the day to day grind while you're doing copywriting was a lot more enjoyable. So, yeah, just in
Mm.
terms of writing, how did the subject matter or the way you felt while you're doing those different types of writing compare to each other?
Yeah, I think in the legal sense, the writing in law is almost like putting together a puzzle. It's like you've got all of these preconceived words, phrases, ideas, and you just need to order them in the most specific way. I think where copywriting is a little bit different. is that you can paint the picture. It's not a rectangular puzzle with all these pieces that fit in perfectly so that you have a condensed legal argument. It's that you can draw a picture rather than do a puzzle. And so there's a lot more creative freedom about what you create. Obviously, there's goals and KPIs and you actually want to achieve specific things, but the doing is a lot more creative. There's a lot more creative freedom. And I think that's probably the creative freedom is why I love writing so much. And I think that the law just didn't have that for me. And so copywriting did offer that.
Yeah. Okay. Now, jumping a little bit back into that dream for writing a book, have
Mhm.
you, up until this point, written anything where you're like, okay, this is quite short, maybe it's just a draft or something, but I do want to turn this idea into a book? Or like just when you were much younger, were there any pieces you wrote that you felt could turn into books?
I think there's lots of very small pieces. I have a notes page on my phone that I'm constantly jotting ideas down. There's probably thousands of words in there now, just from little tidbits where I'm sitting on the train and I think of an idea. And often it's not even fleshed out ideas. It's more of a question, like I want to investigate this.
Mm.
Um, and to be honest, I just haven't gotten to the stage where I've started putting the book together, largely because I've spent all this time figuring out what it is that I want to do. It's always just been a back seat. But now, having started the business, getting a little bit more autonomy over my day and my work, it's something that I hope to dive into towards the end of this year. And I still don't know what shape it'll take, but at least I can start the investigative process and
Yeah, yeah, that's really exciting to hear. Just on the business, could you just tell us a little bit more about what you do now with the copywriting and the ghostwriting? And I guess, yeah, what the day to day looks like and what sort of things you're able to do for your clients.
Absolutely, yeah. So as I said, I worked as a copywriter for about 18 months. And as a copywriter, you're generally writing on behalf of a brand. So in the extreme sense, Nike comes to you and says, hey, we want to put our website together or we need a slogan. And the copywriter comes up with just do it or something like that. Ghostwriting is a little bit different in that you're primarily writing for personal brands. So on behalf of a specific individual. So I might be writing for an author or for a business owner or for yourself, Brace. And so for me, I always liked writing on behalf of people rather than on behalf of brands. I still enjoyed writing on behalf of brands, but I thought people was where I had the major enjoyment. And so the idea of a ghostwriting agency came to me through a bunch of different areas. And what we do for clients at the agency is basically help them build their personal brand on LinkedIn. So if you're a B2B business owner, so a coach or a consultant, you obviously need to have a brand. You need to have authority, you need to have credibility, and you need to drive customers towards your business. And the best way that I know how to do that is to build a really vibrant personal brand on LinkedIn where everybody that's on the platform is either a working professional, a student, or a business owner. And so if you work in the B2B space, that's your target audience. And I help business owners write thought leadership content that doesn't just sell their business, but actually positions them in a position of authority so that they can get more customers and also get things like podcasts and speaking gigs and things of that nature.
Yeah. So what I'm interested in with that is obviously with your clients, they'll be from diverse backgrounds. So when you're ghostwriting for them, channeling their voice, how do you know what sort of things to talk about when it comes to thought leadership? Like what's the sort of research process like? And I guess how do you work with them to try to make it something that would be consistent with who they are as a person?
It all starts with a strategy meeting, assuming the client signed on. And for an hour, I really just get to understand them, their business, their industry, and their goals for writing on LinkedIn. And that is just an in depth conversation to really just get the ideas all out in the open, what they're trying to achieve. From that, I do a lot of research on their industry, other people who are doing things well in their industry in the branding space, people who are doing not so well. How can we position them to be unique, but also effective? And then once a month, we have content meetings. So what that looks like is me coming in with a bunch of questions that either I have about their business and the way they do things and about the topics of authority that they can speak to, or that customers are likely to have. So with regard to pain points, with regards to customers wanting to know more about their business and how it can help them. And I basically interview them like this and I record their answers. And then from that, I start to put together these posts. And in terms of the tone of voice, I always say that as much as we differ a lot in terms of tone of voice, the first thing you need to do is get a really clear and basic understanding of the idea. So I always think of it as like a skeleton. Like, what's the idea you're trying to say? Put the skeleton together. And from that, you want to build off what their tone of voice looks like from the skeleton. If you were talking about you love coffee, for example, The initial post would just start off as, "Hi, I'm Braith. I love coffee. Reason one, reason two, reason three, reason four, reason five, conclusion." Let's say is a really simple example. That wouldn't change for anyone talking about why they love coffee, but how you talk about why you love coffee will be very different to how a very different personality talks about how they love coffee.
Mhm.
So once you've got a good argument, which I guess the legal studies helped a little bit there, once you've got a good argument in place, then you can start to dress it up in ways that suit the individual. And that's how I go about developing tone of voice. So start with a base. And I think the tone of voice is, we have some strategies in place internally, but the main thing is just understanding the person. How do they talk to me in the meeting is going to give me a very good
Mm.
understanding of how they want to talk to their customers.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting and really insightful. How did that compare to back when you were doing the copywriting for brands? Was it quite similar when you're trying to understand the brand's voice? Um, what are the sort of similarities and differences when you're just trying to figure out tone of voice with copywriting versus the ghostwriting?
It's quite similar because, from a branding sense, a good example would be you're writing for a nursing home brand and then you're writing for an alcohol brand. They're going to be
Yeah.
two extremely different tones of voice. The alcohol brand is going to want to come across as fun, party, bubbly, bright, and the nursing home is going to want to come across as extremely nurturing, extremely caring, and along those sorts of lines. And so, again, it still starts with the same base. What's the message we're trying to communicate? And then how do we adapt the tone of our writing to make sure that it communicates that? So you wouldn't have in a nursing home this call to action, "Can't wait to see you come through the doors," or something like that. But you would have that for a pub, or you wouldn't have for an alcohol company. "We really appreciate you visiting." Like, the tones really differ in how you say the same thing. And so it's essentially the same premise. It's just, rather than molding it to the individual's personality, you're molding it to the brand personality.
Yeah, okay. And now putting the spotlight back onto you. I know I mentioned before the way we met was because I saw your posts on LinkedIn. So before you started the ghostwriting agency, you were building out your own personal brand on LinkedIn. So how was the process of finding your own tone of voice and your own sort of image that you wanted to portray and the sort of things that you wanted to provide value on?
It was a lot of experimentation. When I started in January of this year, I wasn't 100% clear on what I wanted to write about. I had this idea of a LinkedIn ghostwriting agency, but I didn't know if it was a viable product. I didn't know if I could actually grow on the platform. I knew I had all the writing skills, but I thought I need to actually be able to sell this to other people. So let me spend 6 months literally just obsessing over LinkedIn and what it takes to grow, what it takes to make a good post, a bad post, what it takes to grow a brand. And I had some good success with it. But early on, it was tough. It was a lot of experimentation. And now I have all the systems in place of how to basically do what I did in 6 months in a couple of weeks. But it took some time to get there. And it was really just test, measure, iterate, really. It was, I think this is going to work. I think this provides value. Did it work? No, it didn't. Why didn't it work? Or probably didn't actually provide any value. It was probably a little bit, I was maybe just bragging, or it was came across as too vanilla, whatever it might be. And you start to learn. And the other thing in the early days that I did is, when I didn't have any authority to speak to, curation is a really powerful tool. So there's curation and there's creation is, I'm going to come up with an idea and present it to the world. Curation is, here's 7 lessons we can learn from Steve Jobs. So you go out, you study
Mm.
Steve Jobs. You don't have to come up with the ideas that Steve Jobs did, but you can learn lessons from curating his work. And so early on, I just did a lot of curation. So it was, I looked into this person, studied what they did. Here's some great takeaways. I read this book. Here's some takeaways. And then from that, you start to develop your own tone of voice, your own ideas, your own vocabulary. And then you start to transition to the creative side of things.
Yeah. So one thing I've noticed is that the experimentation, that sort of method that you've taken has really helped you, I guess, advance, whether it's, as you mentioned before, experimenting with different types of content and figuring out what sort of content you want to focus on. Or back when, did the podcast, got to meet a lot of different people and it ultimately led to the social media jobs. So when do you think that mindset of being able to experiment rapidly to find what works for you, how did that start? Was there like a particular point where that sort of mindset and the conviction to be able to do it actually started?
I think it started out of frustration with not having that trait. I think earlier on in university, say prior to the podcast, I had all these ideas in my head, but they just never came to fruition. Like at any point in time, I would be talking to my friends, my partner, basically saying, "Oh, what about this idea for a business? What about this? I should start this podcast. I should do this." And it was just all up in my head. And I think I just got real with myself. Like, you're talking about all these things, but you haven't actually tried doing it. And so I think that's an important part. Like, you perhaps have to go to that place and get frustrated with yourself to start taking action. And the other thing is, I think getting to a place where you're just not afraid to fail in public, I think is the key thing. Like with the podcast, I did 20 odd episodes before I eventually stopped it to do other things. And it was hard. I was like, what are people going to think of me? I put all this time into the podcast. I've been working on it, I've been promoting it. And then I'm just turning around and saying, I've gotten what I wanted from it, or I'm stopping for now. And that fear of what other people think basically stop you from starting and stop you from stopping. But I think just going through the pain, basically just saying, following your gut and saying, I've just got to make the decision. I was scared to start this podcast. By week 2, it was fine. I'm scared to stop this podcast. By week 2, it'll be fine. And just ultimately having a small circle of people whose opinions you care about, and then everyone else just live by the sword, die by the sword, which is a hard place
Yeah,
to
I
come
love
to.
that. Yeah, I can imagine because I've definitely gone through the same thing myself. Just all these different ideas of all these things you want to do, as you said, like the podcast or creating content, starting a business. And yeah, the more you think about it, the harder it is to actually start any of them.
Mhm,
But I know you mentioned how the frustration basically created the action for you.
mhm,
But were there certain smaller steps you took in order to feel like, okay, I can start a podcast, for example, or
mhm.
I can pivot into this area? Do you remember any potentially smaller actions or maybe habits that helped you start changing that mindset?
I'm sure there were. It's difficult for me to think about what the small actions were. I think there weren't so many actions as more mantras that I'm repeating to myself that it's not going to be perfect when you start. And I think I always think that the first one I did out of frustration, and then every jump or every decision gets easier because I knew the first one was okay. But I think you just have to
Mm,
do it before you're ready. I wish I had a better answer about the habits. I think it's good to have a small circle of people who call you out on things and say, you come to them 7 times with this one idea and they're talking about it. Sometimes you just need to someone say, go do it. And they walk you through a bit of a plan. That's helpful, but I'm not too sure about the specific habits. It's something I have to think about.
yeah, for the one you said about the small circle of people that kind of just pushed you to do it. Yeah, could you talk about that first experience of the very first time it was like something you kept going back to them about, and what did they say to really push you over the line? And I guess just walk us through that experience.
Yeah, I think it was probably my girlfriend when I kept saying, I really want to start a podcast. And I had this notebook in my room of all of these different names that I'd get on and everything like that. And I don't remember the specific conversation, but I'm sure somewhere along the line she said, just start reaching out to them. Just start sending random emails. Or
Mm.
she said, just go for it. And then I'd say, I'd have all the podcast equipment open on my laptop about to buy. And then I'd think, oh, no, I don't know if it's actually what I want to do. And I think she just helped me pushing over there. Just say, go for it. I back you. And then you start to back yourself.
Yeah, that what you said about having all those like different podcast equipment, software and hardware available. Yeah, been through the
I
same
bet.
thing myself, and yeah, so that's really cool to hear. In terms of that list of people that you had, who was the first person that responded to you?
As in, once I'd started the podcast.
Yeah, once you started outreaching people.
Oh, the very first one, and to this day was probably one of my most exciting guests, was Gus Wallen. He's a radio personality, sports commentator in Australia. And he also runs, the reason I had him on is he runs a not for profit called Gotcha for Life, which is a mental health, particularly male mental health charity. And he really pioneered this idea of mental fitness, which is mental health can give connotations of like someone in a lab coat coming over and there's some problem. Whereas mental fitness is something that, like your physical fitness, can go up and down, and it's just a constant maintenance thing. It's something that you need to have habits in place to make sure it doesn't get out of hand, and that you can easily measure when you're having a good day or a bad day, or a good month or a bad month, or when you've let your body slip over Christmas. And so the idea of mental fitness was something that really interested in me. So I reached out to him through the charity, got in touch, and he came on, which so grateful for him because I had 0 episodes at the time. So there wasn't like I could say, here's some great guests of your caliber that I've had on, and here's what it did for them. It was just, he went out on a whim, and I was really fortunate to get him.
Yeah, I love also the concept of mental fitness and how it's all about you having the control over it. So, yeah, that's
Mm.
super interesting. Did it get easier when getting up to 20 episodes? Did it get easier as you put out more content? The outreaching process feel easier? Were there more people that you could connect to, or were there certain things that you did in the outreaches that started making it easier for you to actually get in contact with these people that you've never spoken to before?
Yeah, I think it was more the latter. I don't think over the 20 something episodes I did, my brand got big enough to where I had to, it did make it easier to get guests and say, here's how many episodes I've done, here's some people I've had on. But I think it was more that my ability to reach out and know what to say in an email um, improved. Early on, it was just like, hey, I've got this podcast, still figuring out what it's all about. I'd love you to come on for half an hour and talk about, I didn't even know what. It was very raw. And that's why I'm grateful to Gus for taking the opportunity and those early guests. I definitely got better at the process, better at sending not only more emails, but getting more specific about what I said in those emails. And obviously, as I said, having more and more guests gives you more social proof to put in those emails to say, here's some of the caliber of guests I've had on. I'd love you to come on. But I don't think my brand ever got to the stage where, like, I never had anyone reach out to me, say, hey, I saw Gus Warren was on your podcast. I'd love to come on as well. I'm sure that would have happened down the line, but it was, yeah, I just moved on to different things.
Yeah, okay. And that sort of outreaching process that you were able to refine, would you say that has helped you nowadays when obviously building your own business? There would be a lot of different people that you have to reach out to. What has transferred, and I guess what did you learn from outreaching so many different people that you're able to use today?
The first thing is I got rid of a lot of the dumb mistakes. I remember when I was getting guests for the podcast, had a copy and paste email, which then I just changed the name and a little bit about what I'd like to speak to them about. And I think one time I sent an email to someone and completely used the wrong name, forgot to change the
Mm,
name. So really dumb mistakes like that. Completely got rid of those, which was good. And then also the initial fear of I'm sending a cold email to someone who I've never met before. Is this really worth my time? I think having seen a few wins back in the day from cold outreach probably made it easier to approach from a business sense. And so I just basically felt like I wasn't starting with zero from the business. I had a bit of experience. I was good at, well, not good, but I felt comfortable talking to people and new people and being able to sell an idea. And it's just repetitions. Everyone who's in sales will tell you that it's repetitions. And it's the little improvements from email to email, sale to sale, outreach to outreach that compound over time. And I'm still very much at the beginning of that, but I'm a lot better than where I was when I started the podcast.
yeah, okay. I wanted to now move on to that other barrier that you talked about, that being afraid to start something in public or stop
Mm,
something while you're in public. How does that stopped you in the past? So if we take it back all the way to before you even started a podcast, back when you just had all these different ideas, maybe it was during high school, for example. Can you
mm.
think of any times that it stopped you earlier on in your life? And how'd you eventually get over the barrier of caring what being working in public has on you?
I think I was very fortunate in school to do a lot of public speaking, a lot of debating, and a lot of just in general sort of public facing things. I went to Oak Hill College, which is a great school in the hills area of Sydney. And I think from a young age where I didn't even have the time or the self awareness to worry about what people were thinking of me. I was getting up on stage, I was doing speeches, I was doing debating and doing all sorts of things like that. And so that meant that I wasn't super scared of it because I was just quite used to it from a young age. But I still had it. I still had the fear of starting something. And there are a few times, there's nothing that I haven't started to this day that I was still held back from. But I think I would have started the podcast 6 months earlier. I would have quit law 6 months earlier. I would have started my business even maybe a little bit earlier if I wasn't worried about all of these different things. And each time I've gotten closer and closer to starting it at the right time because there's just always that period of whenever I'm sure you're starting the podcast or starting many of the things you do, there's that idea. And the time from idea to execution is just full of excuses of why it won't work, or why you shouldn't do it, why it's not worth your time, and what other people are going to think of you. I think literally the only way to overcome that is to just do it. And I wish there was a better answer. And I'm sure there is out there, but I certainly don't know what it is. And I wish I could give something more actionable. If you have this habit or if you do this, it'll get easier. It gets easier only by doing it. And I think
Mm.
putting something out there in the world or putting yourself on a platform, going through it, and then realizing at the end of it, oh, it's not that bad. It's fine. And also for the few people who don't like what you say or the bad comment that you get or something like that, you realize that they're fine as well because you just, you start to think to yourself, what sort of person is going to say this to me? If I don't like that sort of person, should I be really listening to what they say? But it's like, yeah, don't take good vibes from people whose position you wouldn't want to be in. And it's a hard thing to learn because we're social people, but it's something that I think you just have to, you realize pretty quickly once it starts happening. And this is just in my small experience, but I think it's really just trial and error.
Yeah, and I completely agree. Like, it is hard to describe specific things you can do to take that next step. But as you said, you just have to take that first step because every step afterward gets a bit easier. And I guess you give yourself the confidence by giving yourself evidence that you can do this one certain thing. And then everything afterwards, there's a little less fear each time. Yeah, it's really interesting to see how it's translated for you and all the things that you've been able to start. I wanted to just ask about, yeah, sorry, you go.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, it's like riding a bike. You're not going to learn to ride a bike by drawing pictures up or writing down things to remember. You jump on, and the first time is scary, you fall off, but it's the only way to learn.
I love that. Who are your biggest influences, would you say, for the path that you're on today?
A big one for me, who really inspires me a lot, is Ryan Holiday. He is someone who's made about as successful a career as anyone ever has as a writer and as someone who writes books. And so that's really inspiring to me to see someone who has had huge success in the writing space, but then has also done it with great humility and never really drifted away from their gut feelings about things. He writes about Stoicism, and he talks about when he first pitched it to his publisher that it really wasn't that big of an idea. The publisher didn't like it. Who wants to hear about ancient philosophy? And now he's one of the most successful authors in the world. His most recent book was the top of the New York Times, and it's literally regurgitating ideas or explaining ideas from 3,000 years ago in ancient Rome. He's really inspiring to me in that he's interested in something and he willed it onto the people because he was interested and he figured other people would, even though isn't something that is obvious. So he's been a huge inspiration. There's all sorts of people. I'm trying to think who else has been a big inspiration.
Well, just quickly, for people who have never heard of Stoicism or don't know too much about it, how could you just give them like a quick rundown of what it is?
Yeah, so it's actually been getting a bad rap recently because it's counter to what a lot of modern society tells you to do. Basically, Stoicism is you can't control what happens, you can only control how you respond to it. And so basically, that is Stoicism in a nutshell. It's that bad thing happens. Yes, it's terrible, it makes you feel bad. It's not about suppressing those emotions, but it's about not letting those emotions guide the next decision. It's about making
Mm.
sure that you make not always rational decisions, but the right decisions, even despite the floods or the flames or whatever it might be, that you walk through life with a clear head and you aren't swayed by the boos or the cheers or by the good or the bad. You're stable in that sense. You're stoic.
Yeah. So how does that conflict with some of the ideologies of today?
I think that today, and there's a lot of merit to this, though I think that it could be sometimes an overcorrection, is that everyone's told to lean into their feelings. And
Mm.
I do think that for a long time, particularly as men, we probably suppressed feelings way too much. But I think that there's been an overcorrection in the sense that, yes, feelings are important, but if you just dwell in those feelings forever, you're never going to make progress. And if you look at it on the social media side, people, it might be that they fall too much into there's this idea of audience capture, which is where people change who they are in order to basically satisfy their audience. So they're listening too much to the cheers and this starts molding who they are and they start leaning into it and they get a big head about themselves. And the same goes where with the boos, right? If you're creating content and everyone's coming after you saying, this is wrong, this is incorrect, this is bad, you should be talking more about this. You start to lean into that and then you become very anxious and afraid of always being under the fire. Stoicism would say that there's going to be cheers, there's going to be boos. At the end of the day, none of them matter. You have to stay on the path and you have to take them as feedback, but not become them, not give all your power away to them. It's
Mm.
use them as feedback, but ultimately keep your autonomy and power and stay on a steady path.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like some of that backlash you mentioned is probably from not understanding Stoicism to
That's right.
that more subtle degree and just thinking it's about being stoic and acting like you nothing phases you, which is obviously not a accurate understanding of it. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting for sure. Going back to the pool room podcast, so who would you say was your most exciting guest or the most interesting thing you learned from one of your guests during those 20 episodes?
Gus Wallen was probably the most exciting. It was my first episode. He was a pretty big personality in Australia. And so that was super exciting. I was excited for a week in advance of that, just every day, like looking at my questions. Like that was definitely the most exciting. Another one that sticks out, Ben Damon, who was ultimately the conversation with him is ultimately what led me to ending up at Fox Sports. He was really interesting. He's a guy who had traveled all over the world and covered boxing. He'd met with people like Mike Tyson. I find super interesting. So that was really cool. There was another one, a runner named Lucy Bartholomew. I found that a really interesting conversation. She's an ultra runner and she runs hundreds of kilometers at a time, competes in all these races all over the world, and understanding what it takes to be an athlete of that caliber was pretty interesting as well. They're the three that jump out off the top of my head.
Yeah, and I noticed that a common theme in the podcast was a lot about athletes and sport in general. So, how did learning about all these different people working in different areas of sport, whether they were an athlete themselves or covering the different activities of athletes and sports people, how did that affect the way you saw sport, the sporting industry as like a potential profession for you? In
What I really like about sport is that it's a global language. Obviously, each sport has its own rules, but wherever you go in the world, there is sport. And the reason is because it plays on our tribal instincts to have a team, to want to perform. And so, beyond being interested in sport, just because if you grow up in Australia, the chances are you follow a sport and you follow a team. That's been my upbringing. It's always been around sport. And all of my fascinations as a kid were either to do with rugby league or to do with cricket and whatever it might be. So I've always been fascinated in that sense. But when I think about why I like it a little bit more deeply, it's that it's all about personal achievement. It's about overcoming obstacles to rise up and above. It's about self-actualization, becoming the best athlete that you can be. It's really just a really good metaphor for how we should all treat ourselves in life. We should always be improving. We should always be striving to achieve, not just for the sake of it, but for all of the amazing memories that come along the way. And I think that's why the world's fascinated by sport, and that's why I was fascinated by sport. And I think commentators, the best commentators give life to the athletes and their stories. With Gus and with Ben as well, they weren't just commentating on the sport. They were always doing behind the scenes interviews and documentaries, and they're really interested in the stories behind sport. And the stories behind sport, there's the stories of rags to riches and everything like that. They're super interesting. And so I think it's all those reasons in one.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree with that a lot because I personally love sport as well. Yeah, but I wanted to just jump a bit to back to writing. So I know that there's a lot of writing that you would do throughout your days, whether it's for your own LinkedIn account or for the founders and executives that you're ghostwriting for. So do you ever get sick of writing? And are there any systems you have for yourself that ensures you're efficient no matter what, even when you're writing like the
Mm.
whole day?
Yeah, I think compared to most people, it takes me a lot to get bored of writing. One of the best things about copywriting and ghostwriting is that you're writing for different brands, different people on completely different topics. And so even though you're always writing, to me, writing is just formalized thinking. It's like materialized thinking. And so if I say to you, do you ever get bored of thinking? It's not that you get bored of thinking,
Mm,
you just get bored of thinking about the exact same thing. Like you can't think about the same problem for 4 hours. But once you finish with that problem, you go think about something else. And so for me, writing is in a similar sense where if I write in one topic for 3 hours, then at that 3 hours, I'm like, oh, I'm done with this topic. But if I pick up a new topic, I'm usually pretty fresh. Now, in saying that, I do think that there is a certain point with writing, unlike other things where you creative freedom, there's only so much creative hours you have in a day. And for me, I really try to time block when I'm doing my writing in the business and when I'm doing the admin side of the business. I really try not to have them intertwined because I find that writing,
right.
you need really focused concentration. You need to be in a state of flow, and you probably only get 4 hours in a day where you can write all out really well. After that, there's not so much that you can do. Maybe you can revisit it later on, but Yeah, I think it's just about separating writing from everything else. There's making and then there's management. Writing is the thing that I'm making when I'm making, and then on the business side of things, once you're done making, then you can then manage the business.
Yeah. So for that comparison between the admin side of things and the actual creative writing side of things,
Mm.
what's the sort of time split or percentage of time that you spend on those two tasks?
In an ideal world, and to be honest, I'm still finding this out. I'm only new to running my own show, so I'm still experimenting with a lot of different things. But in an ideal world, it'll be something like writing from 8 a.m. to midday and having a plan the night before. These are the clients I need to write for. This is how much I need to get done in that time. And obviously, you're realistic with yourself. You don't want to bite off more than you can chew. And then stopping at 12, having a lunch break, going for a walk, and then spending all afternoon building the business, meetings, emails, all of those sorts of things, outreach, engaging with LinkedIn, all of that after the writing. So it's about getting the most creative things done first and then managing it. Now, in the early stages of business, it hasn't been as easy to do that because there's a lot more managing than there is writing while you're building up your client base. But in the ideal world, that would be the perfect balance.
Yeah, and I noticed that you said you're very purposeful about doing that time blocking between the two. Just
Mhm.
for myself, I've noticed that when I try to do the admin side of things, sometimes my mind starts drifting to the more creative things that I want to implement. And yeah, for me, it is a challenge to really stay on track with doing all those admin things to get it done quickly and efficiently. So, what would you say has helped you be disciplined in the way you time block for those two different tasks?
I think they're very different in the way that I approach them. Writing, I want to be caffeinated and locked in a quiet room so that I can really just throw myself into what it is that I'm writing. And so for me, it's grabbing a coffee, sitting down, a clear desk. I'm just writing and no real, maybe a break, like one break in that 4 hour block, but pretty much it's just going hard and getting as much out as you can. The management side of things is actually quite the opposite. I want to be not caffeinated. Don't want to be in like a stressed, frantic state. I want to be in quite a calm state, and I want to be taking lots of little breaks. So I'll be having a break every 30 minutes. It'll be two
Mhm.
emails, a couple of reach outs, break for 10, 15 minutes. And it's because I'm the same as you. It's my mind will just, if it's a task that I don't particularly want to do, but just has to be done,
Yeah.
my mind goes somewhere else. And so music's helpful for that. Going to a cafe where there's noises around and then lots of little breaks. It'll be half an hour of work, go outside, hit a golf ball, play a bit of pool or something, and then back in, whatever it might be. That's usually just lots of short little bursts to get through.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome to hear. So, I know you also said before that writing is just like another form of thinking. And that's why,
Mm,
if you can ever get sick of thinking, how can you get sick of writing?
mm.
When you do things related to strategy or I guess problem solving, if there's some really complex problems that you're trying to solve, do you ever just write things down to help you think better? Is that something that's part of your problem solving strategies, writing instead of just sitting there and thinking?
Definitely. Yeah. I've actually got right here, got a notebook sitting right next to me, and it's just full
Okay.
of ideas that come to me during the day, like completely messy, just like all over the random pages. And it's just, I love handwriting for just random ideas as they come. Or sometimes I've been doing this a lot while I've been overseas is just bringing a notebook somewhere, writing a question down or a top of the page and just sitting with your thoughts and seeing where it takes you. And sometimes you might just
Mhm.
stare off into the distance for 25 minutes and then it comes to you. Sometimes it never comes to you, but it's just about eliminating those distractions. And yeah, physical writing for ideation, I really enjoy. And then I tend to type like out the actual ideas.
So when you're writing for doing ghostwriting or copywriting, do you still write physically first before typing it up, or how's that sort of process like?
The ghostwriting is more all typing. So basically, I'll have the meeting with the client, and then because it's on Zoom and I'm watching the recording, I'm typing as I'm watching.
Yeah.
I'll write ideas for different clients as I'm going. I might draw out a bit of a graph. Here's what this month's going to look like. Here are the different things that we need to hit on. So that's just to visualize short term thinking. I tend to write it down like that, but the actual posts and stuff I'm typing.
Yeah, I get that makes a lot of sense. I guess ever since starting this ghostwriting agency, are there surprising skills that you've picked up or certain things that before you started you didn't think would actually come about?
I think the biggest thing is that I'm learning so much from my clients as I learn about their business. So, for
Right.
example, I work with two business coaches. And so, as I'm interviewing them about how they help people grow their business, I'm getting all these bits of information about how to grow my business. Like, they'll say,
Yeah.
here's my advice for a sales strategy. And I'm like, oh, I'll take that. That's fantastic. Getting a free consulting session with these business coaches. And again, today I had a meeting with someone who works with CRM systems and client management and revenue operations. And there were so many takeaways where I was like, oh, gosh, I got to get that. I got to start doing this. And so it's a really cool industry and a really cool career in the sense that I'm, and this is why I love writing and writing for people is that I get to learn about them, their ideas, the way they think. It's just like reading a book or listening to a podcast. I get access to these really good thinkers and I get to hear their thoughts. And my job is just to give as much reach and as much vibrancy to those thoughts as possible, and as much justice to those thoughts as possible. And the best part is, and the thing that I've learned the most from it is that I get to consume those thoughts as well. It's really good in that sense.
Yeah. I love that. I actually never thought about it that way, but that is super cool for sure. And now I just wanted to jump towards asking about those little wins that you've gotten along the way through adopting a mindset where you're happy to experiment and find what works for you. And
Mm.
now you said you've always wanted to build your own thing, and you're doing that right now with your ghostwriting agency. So, what's been most fulfilling about those small wins along the way and, finally starting to build your own thing and be able to provide value through it?
To be honest, it's something I need to get a lot better at. I'm always the sort of person that's got a bunch of ideas running at once. And when I was working in the copywriting firm, all of my time outside of that, I was thinking about starting this business. And then now that I've started this business,
Mm.
I'm thinking about the book and a YouTube channel, different ways to brand. And so I have to jump onto the next thing a little bit earlier than I should. And sometimes I need to stop and think, oh, wow, the fact that you're running your own business, this is what you've been wanting for so long. Before you start thinking about the next thing, just enjoy it for a while. So it's something I need to improve on, but there are definitely moments where, at all those different stages, for example, when I spent months worrying about dropping law, what everyone would think, what I would do. Once I did it and I'd found a new job and I was doing the podcast, I was like, oh, this is pretty good. This feels so much better than I did 6 months ago. And it's just those short moments. And same with running the business. I spent so much time in the previous job thinking, I can't wait to run my own business. I can't wait to do that. When I'm running my business, then I'll be happy. And then you get there and you have a brief realization of, oh, this is pretty cool. I'm like happy with where I'm
Mm.
at and I'm proud of myself, but it's something I should probably spend more time doing. They're quick, brief moments, but yeah, got that sort of mind where I'm always thinking about the next thing.
Yeah, and definitely interested to see the next thing. As you said, that YouTube channel, is that going to be in any way linked to before how you've grown like sporting channel through YouTube? So is that anything from there that's going to be linked at all, or is it just going to be something completely different?
I think it'll be something completely different. I'm still very much I'm in the paper planning stages. I'm not at all in the writing things down, starting to set it up. It's just ideas that I have in my head and write down from time to time. But I'm just keen to explore. I've been so focused on LinkedIn because of the business, and that's great, and I still enjoy it. But I'm keen to explore branding in new ways and exploring ideas more broadly outside of just LinkedIn and business and writing. I'm keen to expand that in public. In Australia, there's some great guys, Sachin and Adam, who have a show which is all about them building their startup. And I don't know where it'll be, but something that is a little bit more around documenting my journey. I still don't know. We'll see what happens, but lots of ideas at the moment.
Yeah, shout out Sachin and Adam, and I'll link the post that you made about them building in public as well, because I think that was super interesting for people to take a look at that.
They're fantastic.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask you a couple questions that I ask every guest now. If you had to live your life through the words of one single quote, what would it be?
Quotes guy. I've got so many. One of my favorites, as I said, I like to listen to music when I work, and one of my favorite artists is Jimi Hendrix, and he's got a quote which is, "I'm the one who's got to die when it's time for me to die. So let me live my life the way I want to." And I think for me, that's always resonating. Anytime I come to a tough decision, I just think, you know what, I'm the one who's got to die when it's time for me to die. So let me live
Mm.
the way that I want to, and that sticks with me. If you ask me tomorrow, I'll probably have a completely different quote, but that one, it came to me today.
Yeah, I can imagine as a writer, you would have heaps of different quotes, but that's good because this for this next question, you could pull from one of the quotes, or it
Mhm.
could just be something of your own. But if you could reach everyone in the world for 30 seconds, what would you say to them?
That's a hard one. Um, it would be similar to the quote I just said, something along the lines of live the life that you want to live with the people you want to live with. Yeah, just obviously everyone's in very different circumstances. Being Australian, we've got a lot more opportunity than people do all around the world. But I think to tie Stoicism together and to tie the previous quote I said together, to me, the ideal life is being able to do what you want to do when you want to do it, with who you want to do it, and treating that responsibly, not in a hedonistic way where all I want to do is party with wherever I want, having a sense of responsibility about that. I think if you can create a life around those core principles of freedom and autonomy, that's what I would say. And yeah, again, there's so many other things I could say, but that would be the key message. Vincent's
Um,
great.
but yeah, who? Yeah, yeah. Shout out Vincent. But yeah, the question from him was, who has made the biggest impact on your life?
Say my family. My family, I think a lot of what I'm doing today is probably a product of the upbringing that I had, which was very much work hard, be you, follow your dreams, be creative, don't be afraid to do what it is that you want to do. I think it would have been a lot harder for me to do the things that I'm doing if I didn't have that instilled to me by my family. Just a genuine curiosity and interest in the world. I'm fascinated by the world, and I think that came from my childhood. I'm just always reading, always. Mum was a teacher, so she was always reading books. I just think my upbringing has probably been the biggest impact on me, and just in little ways that you don't really realize until you think about it.
Yeah. Okay, I love that. So now for the next guest, what would you like me to ask them?
If in 20 years' time, what do you want a boring Tuesday in your life to look like? Meaning,
Hmm.
Tuesdays, the Seinfeld joke, Tuesdays don't really have a feel. Sundays have a feel. Fridays have a feel. Mondays have a feel. Tuesday doesn't really have a feel. But in some sense, that's cool. It's like, where do you want your life to be such that Tuesdays are still exciting? And what do you want your
Hmm.
boring Tuesday to look like? I think that's a good metric for where you are in life because it's not the low on the Monday morning, it's not the high on the Saturday night. It's the just typical day. What do you want it to look like? So that's what I'd ask.
That's a super cool, yeah, super cool question. Very keen to ask that one. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time, mate. Definitely keen to get you back on in a couple months, but it was awesome to talk through your journey today. So thanks for taking the time. Is there anywhere that you wanted to direct audiences? Anything that you want to tell them about how to reach you or get in contact with your ghostwriting agency and all that?
First of all, thank you for having me on. It's been awesome. It's been so good to chat. I haven't done many podcasts in my time. I've always been in your position interviewing, so it's interesting to be a guest, and I really appreciate you having me on and taking an interest. And thank you to everyone who's listening as well. In terms of checking me out, just head to my LinkedIn, William Eisenhuth. My DMs are open. So if you're interested in working with our agency or just in general, just having a chat about LinkedIn or whatever else, reach out to me then.
Perfect. I'll put that in the show notes for everybody. And yeah, thanks, mate.
Awesome. Thanks again. It was good fun.